Okay, welcome. Today is our health, relax into health, wealth, and happiness meeting, and it's nice to have you here. I'm genuinely pleased that you are here, and look forward to being able to share with you today this invitation to relax into health, wealth, and happiness. So as we usually do, I will remind you yet again that it really is that what this meeting is offering is really in the title, and it really is an invitation that you can accept and receive, and that this opportunity to relax into health, wealth, and happiness is it is an active process. So you have to be present in order to actually take part and thereby receive what it is that is available. And so you can just notice now, and as we move forward through this meeting, that you can just check in and notice what it is that's going on, and notice that you actually can choose to relax and receive, and that all goodness flows from that, that what it is that you truly desire is available to you, and it's not something that you have to suffer in order to attain. It's not something that you have to wait for some indeterminate amount of time or any time at all in order to receive. That you can receive it now, and that now is the only time that you can receive it. And then notice that what it is that really stands in the way of you receiving what it is that you truly desire. If it's not time, which I'm telling you it's not, and if it's not space, that you have to do something to arrive at it, it's not at a distance, which I'm telling you it's not, then the only thing that's between you and it is something that you are presently doing that is actually voluntary, or at least it can be voluntary, and you can release that. And so you can be watchful to see what that is. When I say what it is, it's a little bit misleading, I suppose, because it kind of suggests or implies something that's not intended. It's not that there's some object that's there that's the interference. It is something that you can, the language here is makes it difficult to speak, because no matter how I speak about it, there wants to be some interjection of a noun that doesn't really exist. But just be watchful and see that there is a possibility of really receiving what it is that you truly desire, and that's possible now. It's only possible now. So when you really understand that, or when you really start to look at that in a sincere way, then you'll see that there's some kind of conflict with how it is that you are accustomed to thinking of yourself or your life or perceiving life, and what it is that's being suggested. So I'm suggesting again that you can presently receive what it is that you truly desire. And so there can't be thereby anything that needs to change externally in order to make that so. So it's an unconditional thing. It's not conditional. And that's where the inquiry is really rich, is to start to see all the conditions that you have placed unconsciously, perhaps, but nonetheless, you have created all of these conditions. We say, I will experience what it is that I desire when this condition is fulfilled. I will experience health when fill in the blank. So how will you know when you experience health? How will you know that? You'll see that there are conditions that you've accepted or that you've imposed. And so there are certain things that you think have to happen before you can accept and receive the health that you truly desire, before you can accept and experience the wealth that you truly desire, before you can accept and experience the happiness that you truly desire. There are conditions. So just those words, health, wealth, and happiness, notice that there are conditions that you associate with them. You think that health means fill in the blank. Wealth means fill in the blank. It means certain things to you. And so you're waiting for those conditions to be fulfilled before you're willing to accept the actual truth of health, wealth, and happiness that you deeply and truly desire. And so again, what I'm suggesting here repeatedly is that the truth of what you desire is unconditional. And so it doesn't require that you wait in any way. All that's required is that you're willing to drop the conditions. And so it's why it's an active process. You have to be watchful to see what the conditions are and then be willing to release those conditions so that you can actually accept the unconditional truth of what it is that you desire. So that's just the preliminaries. Today, we're going to explore the theme of acceptance. So I suppose that I'm very happy to be exploring this topic because it's a very potent one. It's a very rich one. It's one that can give so much. It offers so much to you, to us, when we explore it. So there's that. And then perhaps because it is so important, so much in a way, it's much more important than maybe any of the other things that I've talked about. I mean, not that the other things I've talked about are not also important, but this is maybe more important in some ways. And because of that importance, I feel a little bit of nervousness, I think, because I want to be able to communicate about it clearly and effectively so that you can understand the importance and you can immediately begin to make that connection for yourself and see how you can practically apply this and begin to get very significant benefits in your life straight away. So I'll start by, there's many things that I could say about this, but I'll start by talking about, I'll share a story, probably badly as usual, from this, in this case, from the Mahabharata. Fortunately, it's a fairly short story, so you'll be spared what would happen if it was a lengthier story. So this is a story of the ocean and a river. And so the ocean, of course, receives all the rivers. And so the ocean notices something, and it asks this question to the river one day. It says, "River, I've noticed that you delivered to me many of these trees that line your banks. And I've noticed that you don't deliver any of these reeds, or very few of these reeds that are also along your banks. And I find that puzzling because these trees are so strong and sturdy. And these reeds, they seem so weak and flimsy. Why is it that you deliver to me so many of the trees, but not the reeds? And the river says, well, that's an easy answer, because you see, uh, when when I flood, then there's this torrent of water that comes along, and because these trees are so rigid and unyielding, then there's the force of this water just tears them from the banks and brings them to you. But the reeds, they are they're flexible, they yield, and so they don't suffer the same kinds of uh, consequences as the trees do. So this is the short story, and it's now done, so you can relax again in case you forgot to relax. And so what does this have to do with acceptance? Well, when we don't accept, then what we're doing is we're resisting. And so that resistance generates, uh, we're taking on the brunt of anything that we're resisting. And you can notice this in your own experience. Of course, this is an invitation to relax. So hopefully there's not a lot of resistance right now, but if you just take an inventory presently of your experience, you might notice some residue of resistance somewhere, some tension, some non-acceptance. And just notice that the actual experience, if you just tune into it, is that you're bearing the brunt of the force that you're resisting. Now, our conditioning is, and it would have to be, if we're in resistance, the conditioning that produces that resistance says something quite different. It says that I must resist, because if I don't resist, I'll be destroyed. Or if I don't resist, I won't get what I want. But if we look again at our actual experience, what we'll find is something quite different than that. We'll see that, just as the river described to the ocean, when we're in resistance, then we're like the tree, and this force comes along and it sweeps us away. Because no matter how much strength we might have or believe that we have, if it's us versus the totality, infinity, who's going to win? If you're the strongest individual, the strongest, which you're probably not, but imagine that you were the strongest of all the individuals in the entire universe through all time, everywhere, you're the absolute strongest, still, you versus infinity, you're not going to win. You know, the biggest, strongest tree versus the river. When that river floods, the tree is going to lose. Maybe not this time, but eventually. And so the resistance, which is non-acceptance, weakens us, actually. And we don't usually recognize that in the moment, or even, larger context, because again, our conditioning tells us that we need to resist in order to survive, or in order to attain what it is that we want. But as the bumper sticker says, don't believe everything that you think. And it's wise advice, because many of the things that we think, many of the things that we believe are obvious or common sense, actually are not true. And I find this still surprising. I don't know why I find it surprising. I guess it's crazy that I find it surprising, but I still sometimes find it surprising that many of the things that I still have been in the habit of accepting as true, just because they've been repeated many times, or because many other people believe that, or because entire cultures seem to value these things. When I really look closely, I find that they're not true. And that clinging to those things which are not true, it actually produces harm. It creates a weakness. And so turns out that acceptance, or at least non-resistance, has some wisdom for us. Now, I think part of the problem here is that oftentimes we want to take something and we want to have some kind of superficial understanding of it, and we want to apply it across the board. And that doesn't work out very well. So there can be a superficial misunderstanding of what's just been said, that if we try to apply it as a way of conducting ourselves all the time, it's not going to give us good results. And so that would be, if we misunderstand that acceptance or non-resistance means that we should not have any desire, we should not aspire to anything, we should not have any directionality, we should not have any investment into anything, that we should just be completely passive all the time, and we try to apply that as a way of living, then that's probably not going to work out so well, probably, because it's a superficial misunderstanding. So let's take a step back and look at this in a larger context. So we could say at the highest level, there's we call this unity consciousness, oneness, a non-dual awareness. And so there is no other. There's no possibility of resistance, but there's also no sense of individuation. So that exists. And so we're not, at this point, not really addressing that, because the truth is, if you're already living in that state all the time, then you're not attending this meeting. I mean, why would you? So we want to look at one level down, which is a level of individuation, a level of duality. And this isn't bad. It's a apparent reality. We have this experience, and so we want to have an understanding of it, so that we can live skillfully. So we can see that at this level, and I'm just pointing this out just to say that this is a level, and I'm addressing this level. I'm not trying to address a higher level for this conversation. I'm addressing the level of duality. So at this level of duality, at the level of manifestation, at the level at which there's experience, then there is contrast. And for there to be contrast, another name for contrast is duality or polarity. So we can notice that for anything to exist, it has to exist in contrast to its polar opposite, as it were. So we can only know day because of night. If you consider it for a moment, if there was no night, there would be no sense of day. It would be invisible to us. It would not even exist. Similar kinds of polarities exist across the board. Everything exists in this manifest reality. Everything exists as a polarity. So its existence depends upon what it is not, in a sense, in that contrast. So day and night, light and dark, self and other, up and down. We go on and on and on, but everything exists in this way. And so another fundamental one that's worth pointing out is what I want and what I don't want. And I'm pointing this one out because this is really kind of close to home in terms of the conversation of acceptance. So there's what I want and what I don't want. So this is a polarity. So what I want is defined in contrast to what I don't want. And what I don't want is defined in contrast to what I do want. And so you can also think about this in terms of the yin and yang. So if you are familiar with the yin and yang and the symbol of the yin and yang, you'll know that the symbol is shown as a circle that has these two halves, and then one is white and one is black, and then each one has a dot of the other in it. So there's a unity in which the polarity exists. So there's a transcendence, and that transcendence contains the polarity. So the polarity isn't actually two separate, distinct things. They exist as a transcendent whole, but also simultaneously there is a polarity. And so the point is that because we see them as two separate things or two distinct things, but actually they only exist together. So you can't have one apart from the other. And so what I want and what I don't want are like the yin and yang. They are this polarity, and they exist. They always go together. You can't have them apart. You can't ever have what you want without what you don't want. You can't ever have what you don't want apart from what you do want. So we have to understand and accept that that's true when we're viewing it at this level. And then we want to work with this skillfully. So what I don't want and what I do want are always together. And so in order to have one, I have both. Now, because they always go together, I can't completely get rid of one. But I can create a kind of, imagine the yin and yang symbol. Imagine you kind of squeeze it in a certain way, and it's like one part of it kind of bubbles up, and so it gets larger, it appears larger, it's distorted. And so we can kind of play with things in that way. And what happens a lot of the time is, you've probably heard this expression, what you resist persists. And actually, we could actually take that further and say that because there's a law of nature, which is that what you give your attention to grows. So when you're giving your attention to what you don't want, then what you don't want grows. It both persists because you're resisting it, and it enlarges because you're giving it energy because you're resisting it. So the resistance is feeding it energy. So when you are not accepting, when you're in resistance, and I'll momentarily, hopefully, talk about the different ways that this can appear in different aspects of our lives, not in terms of relationship, in terms of our abundance, in terms versus poverty, and all kinds of dimensions of our lives, aspects of our lives where this can show up. But first, I want to kind of cover the basic stuff and then apply it practically. So what we resist persists, and what we give our attention to grows. So when we give our attention to what we don't want by resisting it, then it grows. So notice, and this is, I think, just a part of how things have developed up to a certain point. We can just observe that there has been maybe a tendency, a habit of resistance that we've inherited. So maybe many of our ancestors, human and non-human, have been in the habit of resistance, and maybe it appeared to be successful to a certain point, and maybe we could even say that it was successful to a certain point, and that maybe that was the aim of this process of creation up to a certain point, was that it was fruitful to have a certain amount of resistance in order to grow things to the point where they are. But now we want to question whether that's still true, whether that's actually still what we want, whether that actually is useful to us. Remember, I said that I'm often surprised by the things that I have unconsciously accepted as true because I've been in the habit of believing them, or because I see that that's how everybody else thinks or believes. That's sort of the cultural wisdom, as it were. And when I really look carefully, I find that it's not actually true. And so this is a situation in which this applies, that if just because there's a precedent that something has been the way that things were, does not actually mean that that's true or for the best, at least not now. And so it's can benefit us to question anything and everything. So just look and see now for you presently, is it really actually serving you or this world to be in resistance to what you don't want? And maybe purposefully for now, just leaving that open-ended as to what you don't want, but just see that that applies across the board, what you don't want. I mean, there's a lot that you don't want. So just see what you don't want, you're in resistance to, maybe. Let me clarify that. So if you notice that you have any resistance or non-acceptance of anything that you don't want, just question now, look and question whether that serves you in this world to continue to be in resistance to what you don't want. So there might be some beliefs there that come up just sort of like knee jerk. They're there as a defense mechanism to shore up this habit of resistance. And they'll just kind of suggest to you, I have to, that's how it has to be. That's, of course I have to resist. If I don't resist, then something bad will happen. It's not safe not to resist. I'll be destroyed. I'll be killed. I'll lose what I've got. They'll take advantage of me, whatever. And you'll have all the evidence to supposedly to support that. And notice that kind of reaction can come up from just questioning. It's just a question. It hasn't been, I haven't suggested or instructed that you should presently try to do anything about it. I'm just inviting you to question, just to look and ask the question of yourself. And notice that just asking the question, maybe not necessarily always for everybody, but maybe sometimes for some of us, can prompt a lot of resistance just to the question itself, a lot of reaction. So that's interesting to notice if that happens. But just ask the question, just look carefully and just see, is it really benefiting me or anybody else? Is the world benefiting from this resistance to what I don't want? Well, so let's now look a little bit. Well, okay, I'll come back to that. Okay, so so you don't want, well, okay, let me do this. Let's take another step back. See, I think part of my nervousness about this topic is because it's also so big, and I want to keep it focused so that it can be of most benefit to you. Okay, so let's just keep it simple. So I've invited you to ask this question, and hopefully you've looked and you've asked that question. Now, can you see how you've been in resistance to what you don't want? So you don't want, presumably, you don't want pain, you don't want suffering, you don't want hurt, you don't want humiliation, you don't want fear, you don't want negative judgment, you don't want loss. Generally, the kinds of things that we don't want. There may be other things that you don't want, but this is just some of the things that perhaps you don't want. And notice that a lot of the time, for most of us, when we are invited to think about or consider what it is that we do want, we immediately are reacting to what we don't want. So our energy immediately gets drawn into resistance of what we don't want. So if you want, let's say you want abundance, but notice for many people that immediately that's actually the energy is drawn away from what you want, and it goes into resistance of what you don't want. You don't want the poverty, the fear that's associated with that. There's a resistance to that. I don't want to go there. I don't want that. I don't want that to happen to me. I want to brace myself against it. I want to armor myself against it. And so there's this non-acceptance, this resistance is actually subverting our intention, and it's putting it into exactly what we don't want, so that what we don't want grows. So we become, it makes us fragile, it makes us vulnerable. So now just let me say this also, that for a while, this may not be apparent. So there's a certain maturity that I think is necessary in order to be able to see what I'm describing. And I think that part of the reason for that is that up to a certain point, we can fool ourselves into thinking that we can be successful in achieving what we want while maintaining resistance to what we don't want, or more broadly, that we can achieve anything while maintaining resistance, because we come in with maybe a certain amount of energy that if we use our will, we can funnel that energy, and we can seem to have some gains. It can seem like we're making progress in a certain way, but over time, what happens is that it will start to become apparent that we're not actually gaining, that we're actually losing in this whole equation. And what I mean by this is that because of this polarity, if I think through force of will, I can just go after what I want, and while maintaining this resistance to what I don't want, then it seems like I'm able to make progress in that direction for a while. But because I'm actually giving energy to what I don't want, it's like this weight that I'm dragging, and that weight increases, or the resistance increases. And so I'm having to overcome more and more and more each time that I take a step. And eventually I can't take another step. I've reached that limit because I can no longer overcome the resistance, because the resistance is now equal to or greater than the energy that I have to work against it. In somatics, there's a parallel in this. Hannah talked about red light and green light reflexes. So red light is a withdrawal reflex, and green light is the extension reflex, which is to move forward. So if you have this withdrawal reflex that's chronically triggered, chronically stimulated, these are in opposition to one another. So they're at polarity, the green light and red light. So withdrawal is moving backward, withdrawing, and green light is moving forward. So they're a polarity in opposition to one another. So if you have this, let's say, red light that's chronically triggered, so this withdrawal is chronically triggered, the abdomen is tight, the chest is tight, the whole front side of the body is tight and withdrawing. So there's a tendency to move away from. For a while, you can overcome this. You can compensate by forcing this extension pattern against the red light pattern. But do this enough, and the more times you do it unconsciously, which is what we're usually doing, then each time you do it, the red light pattern gets even tighter. And so it takes more to work against it. And that now they're just getting locked in. Over time, you just can't do anything. You can't move forward. You can't move backward. You can't do anything. And so you've reached that point at which you can't overcome the resistance any longer. And so in this way, that's why I'm suggesting there's a certain maturity required in order to be able to recognize this, because a lot of typically young people, they'll just go. They're going to do whatever. They don't care. Whatever the resistance, doesn't matter to them, because they're going to overcome it. But after a certain amount of time, the story is usually a familiar one to most people. They get the injury, something happens, the chronic fatigue sets in. So at a certain point, they can't anymore. And so that's the point of maturity. Now, a lot of the time, people get stuck in that before they're willing to actually take a look and recognize what I'm inviting. So if you experience that kind of stuckness, or if you experience that kind of inability to overcome the resistance, then that's a positive thing, in the sense that it puts you in a position where you are mature, so that you can actually see what it is that's being pointed to. But then you also have to still be willing. So you're able at that point, but you have to be willing. So the willingness requires a certain kind of humility. And so the humility can come from answering this question honestly for yourself. You can look and ask yourself, am I able to pull myself up by my own bootstraps? Do I have do I have independently the ability to overcome the resistance? Can I do that myself? You have to be willing to actually see and answer that truthfully for yourself. But when you can see and answer that truthfully for yourself, then you are both in a position where you have the maturity and the willingness, because there's a humility to be able to answer that question honestly, where you can see on my own, with all of my effort, with all of my will, I cannot actually succeed in lifting myself up by my own bootstraps. It's not a possibility. I've struggled, I've tried, I've used all of my ability, and I'm not able to do it successfully. So that's the humility. So so now the possibility is to actually start to open up through acceptance. So up to this point, there's been resistance. Resistance was how we did it. We thought if I could just resist enough, close things down enough, just narrow things down enough, that would work for me. But when you get yourself into that corner and you're stuck and you can't do anything anymore, then you need to see that that strategy of resistance is not successful. And so then the possibility is to begin to open through acceptance. And acceptance at first may seem threatening, as I've already suggested. So just to ask the question, is this resistance actually working for me? Is it possible that that this is not successful? Just that can sometimes trigger a lot of reaction, because there's so many beliefs that are built into this whole structure that say the only way is to resist, the only way is to protect, the only way is to fight, the only way is to struggle, the only way is to overcome. But this is unwise. So when we just start to see and just start to see that it's not working, that this strategy of resistance is not working, then we can begin gently to open up to exploring sincerely acceptance and what acceptance is offering. So, okay, so now we can take one step back and see that this attitude of resistance is founded upon a fundamental outlook which is antagonistic. So I need to resist because I exist as something separate, and there's something that is antagonistic to me. Otherwise, there's no reason to resist. So the resistance is founded on this outlook, and it may not be conscious, but it's there, and we can look and see the truth of that. At some level, we can find, oh yeah, I am actually assuming and basing my actions and my beliefs and my outlook and my identity on this assumption that I exist as a separate individual, and that there's something that is opposed to me. And so we could actually start to see that that outlook, that belief, is needs to be questioned in order for us to be willing and able to start to shift into acceptance. Because a lot of the time, I think that acceptance is understood incorrectly. Acceptance is oftentimes, for many people, I believe that acceptance is used and understood as resignation, that there's still something, that I'm still a separate thing, and there's still something antagonistic to me, but I'm too weak or unable to resist it. And so therefore I must accept, but it's a resignation and it's still fearful. Then all we can hope for is mercy. Oh, please don't be too harsh. That, that antagonistic force, please don't torture me. Have some mercy. But is that how we really want to live? Is that actually true? So we can really question everything all the way down to the roots and see, is it true that I am a separate individual and that there's something antagonistic to me? Do I actually know that that's true? What's my proof of that? Other than just more belief, how do I know that that is true? So this is something that I think you have to ask yourself probably more than once. I mean, if you're very lucky, I guess you could just ask it once and the answer is so clear that you never have to ask it again. But probably for most of us, it's something to return to often. So just remember that question. Ask yourself that question as often as necessary. How do I know that it's true? I mean, first you have to look to see that that's operating, that there's a belief of separation and antagonism that is operating. If there's any resistance, that belief is there underlying it. And so you want to see that the resistance is a dead end. And then you want to see that the resistance is founded upon an underlying belief in separation and antagonism. And you can question, how do you know that that is actually true, that there actually is separation and antagonism? Then if and when you can see that you don't actually know that that's true, that there's no real hard evidence, irrefutable evidence demonstrating for sure that that is true, then you could actually start to question what alternative possibility might be true. So might it be possibly true that that there is instead of antagonism, there's something for me, and that rather than being separate, I'm intimately connected and part of the whole. We could just look to see if that's a possibility that might be true. Is there any way that we could see that might be true? And when I look, I see quite a lot of evidence, actually. There's really no evidence that I find when I look that I'm separate and that there's antagonism, but I find an abundance of evidence that supports the view that I'm connected and that life is for me. If you're not presently seeing that, you might think that sounds crazy, but I find there is an abundance of evidence supportive of that. So you could start to look and see whether that might be a possibility. And if you start to look in that way, you might see, as I do, that there is an abundance of evidence. So not that we have to draw a conclusion, but just to start to see that there's evidence suggestive of this, so that then we can maybe begin to explore this possibility of acceptance, not resignation, but acceptance, because acceptance, in the way that I see it, is a natural emergence from a view of connection and support, I don't see how I can actually experience or know true acceptance as long as I believe that I might be uh, destroyed at any moment. There's a certain level at which, of course, we can see that we can paint that picture and make it seem convincing. So it's not crazy to believe in separation and antagonism, because at a certain level we can distort things and twist things so that that appears to be true, but it does require a kind of distortion and compartmentalization. Whereas if we take a step back and start to see things in a more open way, can realize that that's not actually a fundamental truth, and it begins to be clearer that maybe there is a connectivity and support. Because in the actual experience, that's what we actually experience. I don't have any ability to experience separation. I never found separation. I've never found that. It's not something that I can directly experience, but I can certainly experience connectivity. Everything that all my experience is connected. I can, and I can certainly experience support. That's the actual experience that I have. What do I mean by that is that I notice, well, I'm here. And if antagonism was definitely the truth, then it's not so clear that I would be here. But I am here despite all of my concerns, despite all of the fears and anxieties that I've had and all of the so-called near misses. Despite all of that, despite all the odds, I'm here. So that's certainly suggestive of support. I experience support here. I mean, I'm sitting on something. There's support here. I experience this body as support. So there's an actual experience of support. So this can begin to open up this possibility of exploring authentic acceptance. So acceptance, again, is not resignation, but actually it means to be willing to receive, to accept. So if I believe that what is antagonism, it's all hostility and threat, why would I accept it? I don't want it. I don't want to accept that. Then I'm going to resist. But if I start to see that quite possibly what this is connectivity and support, well, I want to receive that. I want to accept it. So naturally, what comes out of that is I begin to explore that posture, that action of acceptance. So then I can actually start to look at, okay, what is it to accept? So if somebody gifts you something, that's part of the equation, but in order for that equation to be completed, there has to be an acceptance. You know, if you're living in poverty and I've got an extra $1 billion lying around that I've got no good use for, and I gift that $1 billion to you, you're still in poverty until you accept it. The moment you accept it, you're no longer in poverty, but the acceptance is required in the equation. So acceptance is to receive. So I can only accept what I actually want. What I don't want, I'm not going to accept. I'm going to reject. I'm going to resist. So I guess you could call it a paradox, is that every time that I'm giving my attention and energy to what I don't want, which is there because what I do want exists in contrast to what I don't want. So I can't nix it. I can't get rid of it. But every time I do that, then what I don't want grows, and I'm not accepting what it is that I do want. In order to accept what I do want, I have to be willing to make this shift in my self by digging down, in a sense, and seeing fundamentally how is it that what are the assumptions that I'm making? If I'm assuming that this is a hostile universe, then I'm going to always have my energy will always go to what I don't want. It really can't do otherwise. Despite all of my effort, I could work really, really, really hard. And I've found this in my own experience, and I've certainly heard this from others. So I think this is not an uncommon experience of putting in an enormous amount of effort and doing all of the quote unquote right things, but not getting the outcome that's desired. And then it sort of becomes like this sour grapes scenario where the temptation is to say, it's all a lie anyway. There's nothing good. All these people who claim that they're experiencing or found something good, they're just lying, or they're just deceiving themselves. There's no such thing. And so we tend to reinforce our negative view of what we don't want, that through the whole process, we're putting in so much effort, but all of that effort actually is feeding into the resistance. So we're getting more and more of what we don't want. And then because of that, because of the way we've arrived at that, we say, look, there is no good, because I did all of the right things and I didn't get what I want. But in those cases, it's like the alarm is going off to remind us to take a look and see what's actually going on. And if we're sincere, then we will, and we'll see, okay, I've out of ignorance, I've created this situation where I fed what I don't want, all in the guise of what I do want, because I was ignorant of the fact that I was still fundamentally operating from a sense of separation and fear, and thereby generating resistance because I can't accept what I don't want. So what's the remedy? The remedy is, first of all, to look and see how this has been playing out in your own experience, to see if you're experiencing that resistance, if you're experiencing that fear, if you're experiencing that sense of stuckness or being beaten down, then it's, again, like the alarm is going off to notify you to pay attention, to see what it is that you're doing, to make it conscious. So then inquire and look and see, what is it that I'm believing here? Am I believing on some level in hostility, antagonism, and separation? I mean, the answer would have to be yes, but you have to see that for yourself. And then start to question that and invite yourself to see, is it possible that I've been misunderstanding this, misinterpreting it? Can I find any real evidence in truth for that position? And if I can't find real hard evidence, irrefutable evidence, then can I start to open to and see some possibility, some evidence of support and connectivity? And then by starting to open to that support and connectivity and finding evidence, not proof necessarily, because that's a difficult thing, but just evidence that's suggestive, at least it's an opening process. Then bit by bit, I can begin to open and experiment with acceptance, because I'm starting to find little hints, little glimmers of what it is that I want. In some sense, independent of, it's not, it can never be independent of what I don't want, but in a hinting at a transcendence. So there can start to be just a playful opening to accepting. And so what this means then, and this is perhaps it's a paradox and it seems a bit strange, I suppose, but then what can start to happen is there can be a recognition, or at least an openness to the possibility that even what I have called what I don't want actually is in service of what I do want. And that it was only my resistance that was distorting things in a way that was terrifying and unpleasant to me. But when I start to see things in this way, again, this is a paradox, and I don't feel that I've communicated very clearly about this. But part of that is because it's a work in progress for myself, for how to understand and describe this. But just to start to see that even that which I don't want, if I stop seeing it through this lens of separation and hostility, but instead I start to see it through this lens of connectivity and support, then I can start to see, or it can start to be revealed to me, that even what I called what I don't want, not that I have to go seeking it out, but as it happens, because it does happen, the things that I think I don't want, they do happen in life. Whatever those things are, they do happen. But as they happen, through this lens, through this way of understanding and perceiving, starts to be revealed that even these things are in fact what I want. And so there is an acceptance, not a resistance. There might still be a temptation, a habit of resistance initially, but through this kind of inquiry, then it can be revealed, hey, you know what, you have to remind yourself, I haven't been able to successfully pull myself up by my own bootstraps. So, and while I've been struggling and trying to pull myself up by my own bootstraps, all along I was judging this thing as being so terrifying and unpleasant and undesirable, exactly what I don't want. But hold on a second, when I start to see that maybe there's something greater than my limited separate sense of self that is actually operating as and from connectivity and support, that truly has my authentic best interests at heart, then maybe, possibly, even this which I have previously judged so rapidly as being unwanted and undesirable, actually maybe is for my greatest good. There's just an opening, not necessarily right away that you're just embracing it with open arms, but just an opening of maybe this is something to accept rather than resist. I'm not quite sure how that is, but at least I start to see that there is another way of seeing, which is one of support and connectivity. And when I start to open to seeing in that way, then even that which I've rejected previously, I can have some acceptance of. Not forced, not resignation, not, okay, I'll tolerate this, but a new way of seeing it, a new way of actually being open to it as something authentically good that you haven't yet fully understood. Guess we'll leave it at that. So I hope that that has been somewhat clear, even if we arrived there in a somewhat roundabout way. And I hope that it offers some practical steps for how you can put this into practice in your life to begin to receive the benefits of it. Just to recap, when you resist, you cause harm to yourself, whether you recognize that presently or not. But if you're at a point of maturity in your life, then you can look and see the truth of that. You can see that the resistance doesn't work in the long run, that it weakens you and makes you vulnerable and causes you a great deal of pain. And it certainly does not achieve what you actually desire. Then you can start to question whether, well, you can look to see what it is that's at the root of all that resistance. And it has to be true that the resistance would only come about because of a closeness, of kind of self-protection, which has to be based upon a view of yourself and life in the framework of separation and hostility. So then you can start to question whether that's actually true. And this does require, I'm not saying it does require both the maturity and the willingness, because if you're still wanting to cling to the old way, then you'll find all the reasons to cling to the old way. You'll find, you can judge this as a stupid message. It's wrong. I'm ugly and therefore it's not valuable. You find all the reasons why not. But if you're willing, because you recognize that what you've been doing hasn't been working, thereby may not be true, then that willingness will be your support. So trust in that willingness and just gently look to see, is it true? And when you can start to see you don't really know that it's true, then you can actually start to flip it a little bit and actually start to look to see, might it be true that there is support and connectivity? Not to try to prove it to yourself, but just to begin to explore that as a possibility, just to start to see in this new way, not forcing anything, but just gentle, open curiosity. And as you begin to see that it's at least a decent possibility that this might be true, then notice that you can begin to explore acceptance, accepting that life is offering you support and that nothing could be separate from that. So that everything that's happening in your life, internally and externally, is actually in support of you, of the truth of you, of what is deeply good, that may not match with your idea, because your ideas can be all kinds of things. But to start to see in that way, then you can begin to open to actually accepting what life is offering you, even though you might still sometimes be afraid, even though you might notice an impulse to resist. But if you continue to inquire in this way over and over and over, one thing I can know for sure is that this will change your life for the better, because it will align you with what you want, and it will allow your energy to move to what you want, because you'll be accepting it rather than resisting what you don't want. So simple message, a lot of other words thrown in there, but I'll leave it at that for now. So thank you as always for joining. And for those who are here live, I'm happy to stay on for Q&A.